So I was watching this live stream that PSA Sitch and Adam from Think Club did about Hugo and Jake still don't understand Jordan Peterson. It kind of caught my attention, of course, because I'm into Jordan Peterson. I had no idea who Hugo and Jake are, so I looked them up. They have a pretty big channel of 166,000 subscribers, and they have a Patreon, which I believe gives them about 1,200 every Wednesday when they produce a video. So they're not doing too bad. And it just kind of sparked something in me. It reminded me of back in college when I was doing a lot of apologetics, Christian apologetics, and I would interact with people like Hugo and Jake on the regular. And it always frustrated me how shallow their knowledge was of Christianity, and how they never seemed to take an interest in looking up what other people have said about all of their questions and their objections to Christianity, and what have the answers been over the past 2,000 years to religion. And it was very rare to come across an atheist who really took into consideration the whole body of Christian work. I'm talking about something like someone who's read St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, someone who read the early church fathers, someone who knew about the construction of the New Testament from a sort of academic level, to also a plain understanding of it. It was rare to find these people, and move it up through the modern world, not just the medieval writings, but all the way up to the modern day. It was rare to find someone who took the time to explore deeply what other people have said about these objections and so forth. And I know, when I was watching this video, it was easy for me to criticize these two guys, Hugo and Jake, because, they're attacking someone that I admire, like Jordan Peterson, and I'm looking at them, and, they're doing maybe the best they can do with a little satanic sculpture behind them, and a Bible study and so forth. I bet they know the Bible better than I do, but it's probably a different Bible. It's the atheist Bible, and I wouldn't recognize their interpretation of it. And so when I was watching this, I was thinking, here's these two guys talking about Jordan Peterson lying, and I just don't think they understand what Jordan Peterson was doing. And specifically, they're talking about Jordan Peterson adding things to the stories in Genesis regarding Cain and Abel. And they keep pointing to what Jordan Peterson said, and then pointing to the biblical verses saying, look, it's not in there, it's not in there. And I don't think they understood that there's a long tradition of interpretation and trying to make the story come alive to your audience. And preachers do this, and scholars have done this. And so I want to bring up a portion of Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling. It's right at the beginning. And oh yeah, before I do that, there's one more thing I want to criticize. In their critique of Jordan, I think they brought up his fantasy that, like, he brought up some kind of fantasy where if he had power, he might kill someone or something like that. And it was a dark side of Jordan that he was trying to get in touch with and to become aware of, so that when he does have more power, like he's gaining now in the media, he wouldn't succumb to it. He'd know it's there, so he can have his guard up. So these two guys were mocking him, saying, oh, that's what you think of when you dream of having power? I dream of feeding hungry people and solving world problems. And I just thought, how naive and really, God, how naive and how terrible. Here's these two guys, and now it'd be easy for me to criticize, the jelly in the belly here, but I really want to go and criticize the jelly in their brains. And these two guys obviously cannot even resist food. They can't resist a simple meal. How could they resist abusing power when they have real power, when they can't even stop putting food in their face. I know it sounds mean-spirited, but I'm trying to not criticize their weight, but criticize the underlying defect here. It's that you can't even control what you eat. Never mind if you had supreme power over other people. Another thing that might seem mean-spirited, but I'm trying not to aim it at the mean-spirited way, but trying to aim it at a deeper thing, a deeper problem here. One of them has an obvious missing tooth. It's like right in the front of their mouth. Obviously, people have dental issues. I'm not trying to criticize the dental issue, but when you're making $1,200 a week, I assume it's extra money from Patreon. It's not replacing your income. No sane person would take Patreon money and use that as their full-time income, because that can come and go at any time. So I assume he's getting at least $500 or $600 a week extra from what he is getting at his job. Why wouldn't you save the money and fix your tooth, especially if you're going on camera like this? That's not criticizing the tooth problem. That's criticizing his money management skills. He can't even resist spending his own money on things he doesn't need rather than things he does need. So, yeah, here's the person, if they had ultimate power, they'd be feeding the hungry and helping the poor. Okay. You look at the things you have power over now, the food that you're eating, the money that you're spending. You're still not making the wise decisions with it right now. So don't criticize Jordan Peterson over his honest fantasy of what might happen and what he's trying to guard against, the shadow, in his psyche, when you're completely unconscious of your own shadows. Anyway, I want to get to this reading in Kierkegaard because I think it really exemplifies what Jordan Peterson is trying to do in the part of 12 Rules that they read. And he's talking about the story of Abraham and Isaac, and I can barely get through it sometimes without breaking down emotionally because I find it so powerful, but I'm going to try to keep it together as I read it here for you all. Like I said, it's right at the beginning of Fear and Trembling, and this is Soren Kierkegaard, who's no slouch, who's no dummy. And I don't know if Hugo and Jake, I don't know how they are compared to fucking Soren Kierkegaard, but anyway. Once upon a time, there was a man who as a child had heard that beautiful story of how God tempted Abraham and of how Abraham withstood the temptation, kept the faith, and, contrary to expectation, got a son a second time. When he grew older, he read the same story with even greater admiration, for life had fractured what had been united in the pious simplicity of the child. The older he became, the more often his thoughts turned to that story. His enthusiasm for it became greater and greater, and yet he could understand the story less and less. Finally, he forgot everything else because of it. His soul had but one wish, to see Abraham, but one longing, to have witnessed that event. His craving was not to see the beautiful regions of the East, not the earthly glory of the promised land, not that God-fearing couple whose old age God had blessed, not the venerable figure of the aged patriarch, not the vigorous adolescence God bestowed upon Isaac. The same thing could just as well have occurred on a barren heath. His craving was to go along on the 3-day journey when Abraham rode with sorrow before him and Isaac beside him. His wish was to be present in that hour when Abraham raised his eyes and saw Mount Moriah in the distance, the hour when he left the asses behind and went up the mountain alone with Isaac. For what occupied him was not the beautiful tapestry of imagination, but the shudder of the idea. That man was not a thinker. He did not feel any need to go beyond faith. He thought that it must be supremely glorious to be remembered as its father, an enviable destiny to possess it, even if no one knew it. That man was not an exegetical scholar. He did not know Hebrew. If he had known Hebrew, he perhaps would easily have understood the story of Abraham. Quote, "And God tempted Abraham and said to him, Take Isaac, your only son, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I shall show you." And I'm going to read, there's three or four versions of this story that Kierkegaard is going to expand upon that one sentence there, just as Jordan Peterson was trying to expand upon it. So Kierkegaard writes, "It was early in the morning when Abraham rose, had the asses saddled, and left his tent, taking Isaac with him, but Sarah watched them from the window as they went down the valley, until she could see them no longer. They rode in silence for 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, Abraham said not a word, but raised his eyes, and saw Mount Moriah in the distance. He left the young servants behind, and, taking Isaac's hand, went up the mountain alone. But Abraham said to himself, 'I will not hide from Isaac where this walk is taking him.' He stood still. He laid his hand on Isaac's head in blessing, and Isaac kneeled to receive it. And Abraham's face epitomized fatherliness. His gaze was gentle, his words admonishing. But Isaac could not understand him. His soul could not be uplifted. He clasped Abraham's knees. He pleaded at his feet. He begged for his young life, for his beautiful hopes. He called to mind the joy in Abraham's house. He called to mind the sorrow and the solitude. Then Abraham lifted the boy up and walked on, holding his hand, and his words were full of comfort and admonition. But Isaac could not understand him. Abraham climbed Mount Moriah, but Isaac did not understand him. Then Abraham turned away from him for a moment. But when Isaac saw Abraham's face again, it had changed. His gaze was wild. His whole being was sheer terror. He seized Isaac by the chest, threw him to the ground, and said, "Stupid boy! Do you think I am your father? I am an idolater. Do you think it is God's command? No, it is my desire." Then Isaac trembled and cried out in his anguish, "God in heaven, have mercy on me. God of Abraham, have mercy on me. If I have no father on earth, then you be my father." But Abraham said softly to himself, "Lord God in heaven, I thank you. It is better that he believes me a monster than that he should lose faith in you." When the child is to be weaned, the mother blackens her breast. It would be hard to have the breast look inviting when the child must not have it. So the child believes that the breast has changed, but the mother, she is still the same. Her gaze is tender and loving as ever. How fortunate the one who did not need more terrible means to wean the child. Part 2. It was early in the morning when Abraham arose. He embraced Sarah, the bride of his old age, and Sarah kissed Isaac, who took away her disgrace. Isaac, her pride, her hope for all the generations to come. They rode along the road in silence, and Abraham stared continuously and fixedly at the ground until the 4th day, when he looked up and saw Mount Moriah far away. But once again he turned his eyes toward the ground. Silently he arranged the firewood and bound Isaac. Silently he drew the knife. Then he saw the ram that God had selected. This he sacrificed and went home. From that day henceforth, Abraham was old. He could not forget that God had ordered him to do this. Isaac flourished as before, but Abraham's eyes were darkened, and he saw joy no more. When the child has grown big and is to be weaned, the mother virginally conceals her breast, and then the child no longer has a mother. How fortunate the child who has not lost his mother in some other way. In Part 3. It was early in the morning when Abraham arose. He kissed Sarah, the young mother, and Sarah kissed Isaac, her delight, her joy forever. And Abraham rode thoughtfully down the road. He thought of Hagar and the son, whom he drove out into the desert. He climbed Mount Moriah. He drew the knife. It was a quiet evening when Abraham rode out alone, and he rode to Mount Moriah. He threw himself down on his face. he prayed God to forgive him his sin, that he had been willing to sacrifice Isaac, that the father had forgotten his duty to his son. He often rode his lonesome road, but he found no peace. He could not comprehend that it was a sin that he had been willing to sacrifice to God the best that he had, the possession for which he himself would have gladly died many times. And if it was a sin, if he had not loved Isaac in this manner, he could not understand that it could be forgiven. For what more terrible sin was there? When the child is to be weaned, the mother too is not without sorrow, because she and the child are more and more to be separated, because the child who first lay under her heart and later rested upon her breast will never again be so close. So they grieve together, the brief sorrow. How fortunate the one who kept the child so close and did not need to grieve any more. And finally, part 4. It was early in the morning, and everything in Abraham's house was ready for the journey. He took leave of Sarah, and Eliezer, the faithful servant, accompanied him along the road until he turned back again. They rode along in harmony, Abraham and Isaac, until they came to Mount Moriah. Abraham made everything ready for the sacrifice, calmly and gently, but when he turned away and drew the knife, Isaac saw that Abraham's left hand was clenched in despair, that a shudder went through his whole body. But Abraham drew the knife. Then they returned home again, and Sarah hurried to meet them, but Isaac had lost the faith. Not a word is ever said of this in the world, and Isaac never talked to anyone about what he had seen, and Abraham did not suspect that anyone had seen it. When the child is to be weaned, the mother has stronger sustenance at hand so that the child does not perish. How fortunate the one who has this stronger sustenance at hand. Thus, and in many similar ways, did the man of whom we speak ponder this event. Every time he returned from a pilgrimage to Mount Moriah, he sank down wearily, folded his hands, and said, "No one was as great as Abraham. Who is able to understand him?"
Oh, and God, just leave that Abraham alone. He wants a son, he wants a son. Everybody wants a home. Though I'm not quite sure if poor Isaac would agree. My God, he said, what did I do to make you want to watch me bleed? And I feel sick tonight, I feel just like the dancing flame on the funeral light. And I'm not sure if I want you to save me. And I'd be less uptight if I knew the sight of blood was just your weakness and not the whole reason that you made me. 'Cause sometimes I think it is. Your son, everybody dies alone. Was this world just not quite hard enough for you? I guess like anyone, you've got your own scores to settle to. And I'm so pissed tonight, I feel just like the last remaining Canaanite. And I don't think that I will be returning. And if you wanna see the irony and the savage price of piety, there's a lot of us who are going to be burning.
If you're still here, type Isaac for the win. And so Isaac for the win, that's the key word to show that you're a champion and you went through the entire video. And I think I'm just going to spin up another tune here because I just feel like it. So look up this Airborne Toxic Event, Poor Isaac. It's a good song to finish the rest of it.